There is a barrel sitting in someone's backyard right now, full of free rainwater, collected from the sky, costs nothing, harms nothing, and it is being left to rot. Not because the owner forgot about it, not because they ran out of time, but because of one thing, the mosquito. More specifically, the fear of what happens when still water sits untouched for more than 3 days. The larvae, the wriggling, the cloud of insects that follows. And so the barrel stays covered, or worse, gets emptied out onto the ground, and that free water, that completely free irrigation resource, disappears. Here is what nobody in the $5.8 billion mosquito control industry wants you to stop and think about. The Roman Empire solved this problem, not with a chemical, not with a product, not with something you need to buy, refill, or subscribe to. They solved it with a coin, a piece of copper dropped into the bottom of a water vessel. And for nearly 2,000 years, that knowledge lived quietly in the hands of farmers, herbalists, and village waterkeepers, until the 20th century decided that anything you couldn't patent wasn't worth knowing. What you are about to learn is not a folk remedy. It is electrochemistry. It is peer-reviewed. It is backed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the World Health Organization. And it costs you at most the loose change sitting forgotten in your kitchen drawer right now. Before we get to the science, you need to understand exactly who benefits from you never finding out this works, and how much money they make every single year keeping you dependent. Let's talk about the industry that exists specifically because you are afraid of still water. The global mosquito control market was valued at $5.8 billion in 2023, according to Grandview Research, and it is projected to reach $8.5 billion by 2030. That is not a public health budget. That is a commercial ecosystem, built on the assumption that you will never find a free alternative, and maintained by ensuring that free alternatives stay invisible. Walk into any garden center or hardware store and look at what they offer you for the exact problem of mosquito larvae in standing water. You will find Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, sold under brand names like Mosquito Dunks, retailing at roughly $12 to $20 per pack, with a recommended replacement cycle of every 30 days. You will find Temephos-based larvicide granules, an organophosphate chemical that the World Health Organization itself flagged in 2019 for potential endocrine disruption risks in aquatic ecosystems. You will find effervescent tablets, treated mesh bags, chemical drippers, an entire product category engineered around a problem that a $0 10-piece of copper can manage passively, indefinitely, without a single refill. The comparison is not subtle. A 1-year supply of commercial mosquito larvicide tablets for a single 200-liter rain barrel costs between $40 and $60 depending on the brand. A length of pure copper wire sufficient to treat that same barrel costs under $2 and does not expire. The industry does not advertise this. Extension services funded by agrochemical partnerships do not lead with this. And the reason is not complicated. There is no margin in copper you buy once and never replace. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a business model. The $5.8 billion market does not grow by telling you that ancient metallurgy already solved your problem. It grows by selling you the next SKU, the next formula, the next subscription refill. And somewhere inside that machinery, inside that $5.8 billion engine of recurring revenue, the knowledge of copper ionization was quietly filed away under insufficient commercial interest. But the science did not disappear. It just stopped being funded. And that is exactly where we are going next. The earliest recorded use of copper for water preservation does not come from a laboratory. It comes from a civilization that built aqueducts spanning 50,000 miles across 3 continents. Roman military physicians in the 1st century AD documented the practice of storing drinking water in copper and bronze vessels specifically to prevent what they called water sickness, the constellation of waterborne illness that decimated armies operating in marshland and tropical territory. The physician Pedanius Dioscorides, writing in De Materia Medica around 65 AD, noted that copper vessels kept water cleaner for longer than clay or wood. They did not know why, but they knew it worked, and they built their water infrastructure accordingly. On the other side of the world, the Ayurvedic medical tradition of India had arrived at the same conclusion independently. The practice of storing water overnight in a copper vessel, called tamra jal, appears in texts dating back to at least 1000 BC. The Karaka Samhita, one of the foundational documents of Ayurvedic medicine, prescribes copper-stored water specifically for digestive health and the prevention of microbial illness. This was not mysticism. This was 2,000 years of empirical observation compressed into a daily household practice, passed from generation to generation without a single patent filing. Fast forward to the American Civil War. Union Army field surgeons noted lower rates of wound infection in field hospitals where copper surgical tools were standard versus those relying on iron instruments. An observation that would not be scientifically explained until germ theory caught up with what practitioners had already known empirically for centuries. By the early 20th century, copper piping had become the global standard for municipal water distribution precisely because engineers had observed that copper line systems accumulated less biological fouling than iron or lead alternatives. The World Health Organization acknowledged this history explicitly in its 2004 report on copper in drinking water, noting that copper's antimicrobial properties had been leveraged in water systems long before the mechanism was understood at the molecular level. That mechanism, the one that turns a coin into a biocontrol agent, is exactly what the next part is going to show you. When a piece of copper makes contact with water, something quiet and precise begins to happen at the atomic level. The surface of the metal undergoes oxidation. Copper atoms at the interface lose electrons and enter the surrounding water as positively charged copper ions, written in chemistry as Cu2+. This process does not require heat, does not require electricity, does not require any catalyst beyond the simple presence of water and dissolved oxygen. It happens on its own, continuously, at a rate governed by the surface area of copper exposed and the chemistry of the water surrounding it. The concentrations produced by this passive process are extraordinarily small. Studies measuring copper ion released from solid copper submerged in ambient fresh water consistently report equilibrium concentrations in the range of 0.2 to 2 milligrams per liter, depending on water temperature, pH, and surface area. This range is critical to understand because it sits at the precise intersection of two biological thresholds that operate in completely opposite directions. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency sets the maximum contaminant level for copper in drinking water at 1.3 milligrams per liter under the lead-in copper rule, established in 1991 and revised most recently in 2024. The World Health Organization's drinking water guidelines place that threshold at 2 milligrams per liter. These are the concentrations considered safe for daily human consumption over a lifetime. Now here is where the science becomes remarkable. The concentration of Cu2+ required to inhibit the growth of chlorophyta, the green algae that turns your rain barrel into a swamp within a week, is between 0.1 and 0.5 milligrams per liter, according to research published in the journal Aquatic Toxicology. The lethal concentration for Culex mosquito larvae, the species responsible for the majority of backyard breeding in temperate and tropical climates, sits at approximately 0.4 to 1.0 milligrams per liter, according to a 2011 study published in the Journal of Vector Ecology. Both of these biological kill thresholds fall below the EPA and WHO safety limits for human exposure. What this means in practical terms is that the copper in your barrel is operating in a window where it is simultaneously lethal to the organisms you do not want and safe for the plants you are trying to grow. The mechanism of toxicity on mosquito larvae is not accidental. Cu2+ ions interfere directly with the larval respiratory system, binding to gill-equivalent tissue and disrupting the ion transport channels that larvae depend on to regulate osmotic balance in freshwater. The larva essentially loses the ability to breathe and maintain internal fluid balance at the same time. It is not a slow process. Researchers at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine documented 90% larval mortality within 24 to 48 hours of copper ion exposure at concentrations well within the passive release range of submerged copper metal. But how does this translate to your actual rain barrel? And why is it safe for every tomato, pepper, and leafy green you plan to water with it? The question of plant safety is the one that stops most gardeners cold, and it deserves a direct answer before anything else. Copper is not foreign to plant biology. It is an essential micronutrient. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations classifies copper as one of the 16 essential elements required for normal plant growth, functioning as a cofactor in enzymes responsible for photosynthesis, respiration, and cell wall lignification. Healthy agricultural soil typically contains between 2 and 100 milligrams of copper per kilogram of soil. Copper-based fungicides, Bordeaux mixture, copper hydroxide, copper oxychloride, have been applied directly to food crops at concentrations vastly exceeding anything your rain barrel will ever produce, and have been registered for organic agriculture use by the USDA National Organic Program since 2002. The 2008 study from the University of Southampton, published in Applied and Environmental Microbiology, demonstrated that copper surfaces achieve 99.9% reduction of bacterial load within 2 hours of contact, a finding significant enough that the U.S. EPA formally registered copper alloys as the first solid antimicrobial material in 2008, under registration number 82111211. That registration remains active today. What the study also confirmed is that the mechanism is contact-dependent and ion-mediated, meaning the copper does its work in the water column, not in the soil, and by the time that water has been absorbed into root zones and broken down by soil chemistry, the ionic concentration is further diluted to levels agronomists classify as negligible. Now here is where honesty requires a pause. Copper ionization is not a perfect system. In water with very high carbonate hardness, what most people call hard water, copper ions can precipitate out of solution as insoluble copper carbonate before reaching effective concentrations. In large tanks exceeding 1,000 liters, passive release from a small copper surface may be insufficient without increasing the exposed copper area proportionally. And in systems where water is replaced very frequently, within 24 hours, the ionization process may not have enough contact time to reach larvicidal thresholds. These are real limitations, not footnotes. But in a standard 100 to 300 liter rain barrel with water retained for more than 2 days, the chemistry works exactly as the research describes. Here is what that means for you. You are not a customer in this equation. You are a water steward. Every gardener who drops a piece of copper into a rain barrel is not buying into a system. They are opting out of one. That is not a small thing. That is exactly the kind of knowledge that a $5.8 billion industry spends considerable resources ensuring you never act on. And acting on it is simpler than you think. The first and most important decision you will make is the type of copper you use, because this is where most people make a mistake that quietly undermines the entire method. You need pure copper, what metallurgists and suppliers label as C110 copper or electrolytic tough pitch copper, which is 99.9% pure copper content. This is the red-orange metal you recognize from electrical wiring and plumbing pipe. What you cannot use is copper-plated steel, brass, or bronze. Brass is a copper-zinc alloy, and zinc ions released into irrigation water at elevated concentrations are genuinely toxic to plant roots at levels far lower than the safety margins copper enjoys. Bronze introduces tin into the equation. Copper-plated materials have a surface layer thin enough to exhaust within weeks, after which you are left with a steel object doing nothing. Pure copper wire, pure copper pipe offcuts, or pre-1982 American pennies, which were minted at 95% copper content before the U.S. Mint switched to zinc cores in 1982, are all appropriate sources. Post-1982 pennies are 97.5% zinc with a copper coating and will do the opposite of what you intend. For a standard rain barrel in the range of 100 to 200 liters, the target is a copper surface area of approximately 50 to 100 square centimeters in contact with the water. In practical terms, this translates to roughly 30 to 50 centimeters of 12-gauge pure copper wire coiled loosely and submerged, or 2 to 3 short offcuts of half-inch copper pipe, each about 10 centimeters long. The coiling matters. A tightly wound coil reduces effective surface area by pressing wire against wire. A loose spiral sitting on the bottom of the barrel maximizes water contact with the metal surface, and therefore maximizes ion release rate. Preparation is minimal, but not optional. Before submerging your copper, clean it with a mild acid. White vinegar works perfectly. To remove any surface oxidation layer that has already formed. A dull or greenish copper surface releases ions more slowly than a bright, freshly cleaned surface. Submerge the copper in undiluted white vinegar for 5 to 10 minutes. Rinse with clean water and place it directly into your barrel. You do not need to repeat this process frequently. Once every 3 to 4 months, remove the copper, give it a brief vinegar rinse to refresh the surface, and return it to the barrel. This maintenance cycle adds approximately 2 minutes to your quarterly garden routine. Keep your barrel covered with a fitted lid or fine mesh screen, regardless of the copper. The copper eliminates larvae that hatch inside the water. It does not prevent adult mosquitoes from laying eggs on an open water surface. And a covered barrel removes that opportunity entirely. The combination of copper ionization below the waterline and physical exclusion above it creates a system with no meaningful failure point under normal use conditions. One final note on dosage for larger systems. If you are running a 500-liter or 1,000-liter collection tank, scale your copper surface area proportionally. Double the volume means double the copper. The chemistry is linear at these scales, and the cost of scaling up remains trivially small compared to any commercial alternative. We are still talking about a few dollars of copper wire against $40 to $60 per year in larvicide tablets per tank every single year. You came into this video worried about mosquitoes in a rain barrel. You are leaving it with something larger than that. You are leaving with the understanding that a solved problem was repackaged as an unsolved market. That a piece of metal known to the Roman Empire, documented in Ayurvedic texts 3,000 years old, validated by the US EPA and the World Health Organization, was quietly set aside not because it failed, but because it succeeded without generating revenue. That is not an accident of history. That is how a $5.8 billion industry stays a $5.8 billion industry. What you do with that knowledge is the only thing that matters now. Set up the barrel, cut the wire, drop it in, and then tell one person, not because this channel needs the view, but because every person who stops buying a $45 annual supply of larvicide tablets and replaces it with a $2 piece of copper wire is one less recurring revenue unit inside that $8.5 billion projected market. That is what resistance looks like at the household level. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is a coil of copper sitting at the bottom of a barrel, doing its work in silence, the same way it has done since before the Roman legions crossed the Rhine. If this video reached you through a share rather than an algorithm, then someone in your life already made that choice on your behalf. The least dangerous thing you can do right now is return the favor. Share this before the platform decides it has had enough visibility. Subscribe not to support a channel, but to stay inside a network of people who have decided that knowing is better than buying. And in the next video, we are going into something that the fertilizer industry has spent decades trying to bury. Fermented rice water, a $0 liquid that trials published in the journal Scientia Horticulturae found capable of increasing flowering rates by up to 30% in certain vegetable crops. The mechanism is stranger and more elegant than you are expecting.